Happy Thursday, everyone. I sure do miss your faces. I hope that you enjoyed the vocabulary game that you just played. And you can also play that at home to practice your vocabulary for your quiz next Tuesday. And then the video that you just watched covered or reviewed first person, second person, and third person point of view. Today, I want to quickly go over point of view with you, and I'm actually going to do the activity with you today that the substitute gave to you on point of view. So first of all, we know, or you should know, that first person point of view is where the narrator is a character in the story. So one of the characters is telling the story. That character uses pronouns like I, me, my, we, and us in the narration. Now, you learned last year and maybe the year before that dialogue is what the characters say out loud to each other, and they're in quotation marks. The narration is everything else that's not in quotation marks. So it's first person when you see I, me, my, we, or us in the narration. Third person point of view is where the narrator is not a character. The narrator is not a character in the story. The narrator is telling you the story about the characters from an observer's position. So we call a third person narrator an outside observer, okay? So let's think about our text yesterday that we read together, The Inventor's Secret, about Thomas Edison and Henry Ford. And let's do this activity together. So right now, I want you to put this sheet in front of you. This is the point of view sheet. And it says, point of view describes who is telling a story, either a character in the story, first person, or an outside narrator or outside observer, third person. A narrator who knows everything is called an omniscient narrator and uses pronouns like he, she, and they. A narrator who is a character in the story uses pronouns like I, me, we, us, and our. And that is in the narration as well as the dialogue. Okay? All right, so let's do number one together. So it says on page 20 of The Inventor's Secret. So I'm going to give you a minute and I want you to turn to page 20 in The Inventor's Secret. As you're turning the pages and getting to where you need to be, the question says, who is telling the story? Is it Thomas, Henry, or a narrator? If you look at the whole text in general, we know that Thomas isn't telling the story, Henry isn't telling the story, but a narrator is. So for number one, your answer should be a narrator or an outside observer. Okay, give you a minute to write that down. A narrator or an outside observer. And you can always pause this video to write down the answers. I'm going to move on to number two. How do you know? How do we know that that's an outside observer telling the story? Well, there are a couple ways. First of all, Thomas is not telling the story and Henry is not telling the story, and those are the two main characters. The person that's telling the story is an outside observer, so it must be in third person. So for this answer, we would say, we know because the characters are not telling the story, comma, and, I didn't say this before, but the pronoun I is not used. It's not used in the narration. It might be used in the dialogue when the characters speak to each other and it's in quotation marks, but if it's not in the narration, the words that are not in quotation marks, then it's not first person. So we know that an outside observer is telling the story. Number three, answer these questions about page 32 of The Inventor's Secret. So you can pause the video and turn to page 32. It says, what is the point of view of the author's note at the end of the story? Now, the author's note is that very last paragraph at the end of the story in italics. That means that the words are slanted, the letters are slanted. Okay, and we know that when we look at this, that the author is giving us factual information about Thomas and Henry. Okay, now the author is not a character in the story, they're just giving us information. So the point of view is third person. Once again, we don't see I, me, my, we, or us in the narration. The author is just providing information about real people. So it is in third person. You can pause the video to copy this down. And last, how do you know? Well, I kind of just went over it again. We know this because the pronouns I, me, we, us, and our are not used in the narration. Okay. You could also write that the author is not a character in the story. But again, it's important to note that if in the narration you don't see I, me, my, we, or us, it is definitely third person. But if a character is telling the story from their point of view and the character uses I, me, my, we, or us in the narration, then it is first person. Okay, that's it for point of view, and that's all you really need to know for your assessment or your quiz next Tuesday. So that's a very quick overview. These are review skills that you should have learned last year. If you have any questions about point of view, you know you can always email Ms. Strickland, and I will help you in any way that I can. And I think that's it for this video. Go ahead and move on to the next step.